Alright, welcome back to the Forbidden Mountain. Today we are going to be discussing the latest decks from Amethyst Steel. Kind of just a breakdown of an understanding of like, hey, these were the decks that were successful in week 1. There were 8 different Amethyst Steel decks that made top 8. This is kind of just a meta breakdown for those decks in the tournaments that they were in, so you can kind of understand why they were successful and really start discussing, what we've been talking about in this guide this whole time. And if you're watching this live on YouTube, there's a guide for Amethyst Steel on our Metafy. So if you want to check out, you want to get the full details of things that you might have missed in the past, go check out that guide. It's in the pinned comment below. But if you're live with us now, if you're watching the next chapter, then we need to really start breaking down these decks and really start understanding like what are good about them. So we're just going to be picking apart the top 8 decks. We're going to start with our own team deck. So this was Pave. Pave picked up a nice top 8, 73-player tournament. And the key differences for this particular deck were the Cusco Temporary Whale. So Cusco the Temporary Whale was the 5-cost inkable, 1 strength, 4 willpower, 2 lore with the ability Don't You Say a Word. Once during your turn, whenever a character is put into the inkwell, you may return chosen character, item, or location with cost 2 or less to their player's hand, then that player draws a card. Effectively, what this card does for us is it allows us to ink and then pick up a dock, draw a card, play your card that you drew, play a dock, drew 2 more cards. You get to just get a little bit more length out of your better characters. Specifically, Dock is a really nice pickup. In the more aggro versions, you can play Cusco as a top end, pick up your Nala to reset. Obviously, just picking up cards like Mulan can help you filter through your deck to try and find the answers. But just even picking up, a Captain Hook that is kind of starved the board and said, okay, it did its job, whatever. Picking up a Diablo, like any of these cards can just read Exert, gain a lore, ink, pick it up, draw a card, either ink the Captain Hook the following turn, or you can just play the Captain Hook back to the board, so now it's ready. It's, can still challenge, can still do everything at once, and then you get to play to the board again. That's the big part about Cusco here, is that he's kind of he's in a way his own little mirror breaker, because he opens up the game to quest, and I think that that's a big deal when you're looking for specific things in the mirror exactly. So that's why we're at Cusco here. Obviously, this deck went all the way with the Tink, and then it has like the different 4-cost options, the 4 Genie, the 3 Yzma, and the 2 Dumbo. And honestly, the reason for Dumbo here is because we've decided Genie is a playable card, 3 cost 3/4. We also have Happies, we have Cuscos, like we have lots of additional little ways to just draw cards and compete with evasives. This list did not play any 7 Dwarves Mines, but it very well could have played 7 Dwarves Mines. Definitely a particular option. So when you're looking at this overall breakdown here, obviously with the 3 6-cost characters, we have the 3 Tinks, and then we also have the 8 4-drops, or 5-drops, which is the Belle and the Elsa and the Cusco. So it's a little bit higher, and it's a little bit bigger. And generally speaking, in week 1 of any metagame, if you're going to be playing a particular ink combination, you always want to be the bigger ink combination. So if Amber Steel was going to be heavily played, then we really kind of sort of needed to just like have an answer to all the other Steel decks. And that's exactly what this deck was looking to do. It had Elsa, it had Belle, it had Tinkerbell, it had Cusco, which isn't a bigger option, but it just gives you a little more reach in some of the other matchups and in the mirror match, which is nice to have. Of course, the Yzmas are a card that are just going to be consistently a gamble. I talk about this so very often right now in the game, is that it basically in every single turn of the game, you're kind of playing a gamble. The only cards that this deck does a really good job of trying to break that serve, playing Hook on 1, playing Calhoun on 2, they're pretty much always going to do what you want them to do. They just take away the game, right? Like they just tell your opponent, if you want to quest, go ahead, but I'm going to, definitely remove your character efficiently and like on curve. And then, of course, like our 3-drops, our Cobra and White Rose, they basically get to do what they want to do immediately, along with Lilo. If your opponent allows you to set up a Lilo and you have to blow them out, well, then even Lilo just does her job. Whereas Genie is playing defense in more cases against opposing evasive decks. And then from that point forward, everything's kind of a gamble. Dumbo himself is definitely a gamble. Genie, while it replaces itself, it's still a gamble because against certain matchups, if you play Genie on 4 and they just instantly remove it, it's not going to feel very good. Yzma is the ultimate gamble. Like, this card is on often not played on turn 4 It's more or less played on turn 5 or turn 6 after you've gotten basically all of your cards out of your hand. This is the last card that you play, and you're just saying, okay, like, you go, and if you can't answer my Yzma, then I'm going to get to draw 3 cards next turn almost all the time. So that's pretty much where this deck landed and why it was successful, and there'll be a little bit more hopefully covered on it by Pave. Should be a tournament report coming up for this deck from Pave and Nunez, who played another version of this to a 5-2 finish. So looking at another list from our event, this is Noah here. Now, Noah had a very interesting concept to this deck, and it's really centered around Timothy Q Mouse. So Timothy Q Mouse is the 2-cost, 1 strength, 4 willpower, 1 lore with Let's Show 'em Dumbo. While you have a character with evasive in play, this character gains +1 lore. And it's a 1/4, right? So, like, if we can have a 1/4 that always has 2 lore in this economy, it seems pretty good. And you have Timothy, and then of course the one complaint I have about this list is that there's a lack of Happy. I think Happy is kind of free to play right now in this particular concept with Timothy Mouse, so I think that's just like my 1-2 punch that I would have loved to see. But we have, Timothy with the ability that we need, and then we have 8 3-drops, right? Tinkerbell and Genie, a 1/3 with 2 lore and a 3/4 with 1 lore, but they're both evasive on your turn, which means they both turn on Timothy Mouse. And then, of course, we have Genie and then Elsa. So, 3, 7, 15, 15 easy evasive characters, which should be enough to turn on Timothy. I think the occasional couple of Happies could have just added to this. The other thing here is that there's no 7 Doors Mines. I think that that's another card that I would be trying to play at least a couple copies of if I wanted to go to the extent to play Happy. But the other big deal here is that we are not a Dumbo deck. And that just becomes then the question of, it's week 1. Are we not a Dumbo deck because we didn't get Dumbos? Were they too expensive? Were they too out of reach? It's tough to say for sure. I didn't ask Noah this specific question if it was like a choice of his to not play Dumbo. But to me, if you're going to go out of your way and you're going to play Genie, Tinkerbell, and just like this many 3-drops, I think Dumbo is a perfectly good card for this deck, and it's definitely one that's worth looking at. We can easily shave off some numbers here and kind of just go down. I mean, this deck is playing 23 cost characters, right? Like 16 and 4. So we can definitely shave off some of these 3 cost characters and just put 2 or 3 Dumbos in our deck. It doesn't have to be 4. It's not some crazy commitment, but some number of them, similar to what Pave had, having 2, just gives you access to the additional draw and ways to gain lore unexpectedly, which I think is a pretty big deal. All in all, basically what this list was looking to do was that 4 willpower curve. Palace Guard into Timothy Mouse, into Genie, is 16 willpower over the course of 4 turns. This also allows your Genie 3 to just sing Strength of a Raging Fire and effectively remove any character that your opponent would have played on turn 3 or turn 4. And you just now have 16 willpower in play, questing, for 5, 6 a turn, and your opponent now has to just figure that out. And I think that that's why this deck was successful. Noah was quoted saying he won 90% of his games on the draw against Sapphire Amethyst. I think that number is probably a bit drastic, and I'm sure it's not that high, but I can definitely see a world where this deck, and this in particular, does give Sapphire Amethyst just a bit more problem, because willpower is king in that matchup. Sapphire Amethyst does not have a lot of just direct answers to willpower in general. It has, it's removed Scrooge McDuck for the most part. A lot of the decks from last weekend just did not have Scrooge McDucks in them. So if that's the case, then yeah, you can easily get away with these characters. The other big deal here is the Madam Mim Tiny Adversary. All of our characters have so much willpower, they're going to stick around. So if you just, occasionally turn Timothy Mouse into a 2-strength character, what will that do for you? Obviously, turning Calhoun into a 4-strength character is great. Turning Captain Hook into a 4-strength character is great. You're doing a lot of things that make a lot of sense. Even this Genie going to a 4/4 is massive. So I really like the Tiny Min Adversary as well. I think that this deck, again, is presenting a different way to play Amethyst Steel, and it's just revolving around Timothy Mouse. The question is, how much more can we get out of this card? And like I said, when I look at it, and I see we only have 4 removal, +4 because of Panic and Bell. So that's 8. 8 seems a little low. I would love to be at 10. I don't really count Tinkerbell as a removal for per se, so it's tough. I think she's just a good card in general for the game and for the deck, but I don't count her as exactly removal, because it's not like a 1-to-1 type thing on average. So I would like to find room for 2 Seven Dwarfs Mines in this list, and then probably supplement some of these characters for 2 Happies as well, just to give you a little bit more reach, have a little bit more damage, and then of course, like, you got to answer Seven Dwarfs Mines as well, and you'll see that and come up in some of these other decks. Now, of course, this is, a successful weekend, no doubt. This was the 4th. We had 4 Amethyst Steels in our top cut, so it's kind of a lot. I don't want to like overburden you with a lot of information, but I also don't want to leave you hanging. So this is like the more Dumbo variation of this list you can see here. That does include the Seven Dwarfs Mines. It has the same evasive package with the Tinkerbells and the Genies, and this one does have Happy. So for me, if I'm just looking at the deck, this also goes to the extent of playing Mr. Smee, which should be Jafar. I explained it in the meta report, but basically there's a technical downside to Mr. Smee, so you shouldn't really play it. You should play the Jafar instead. But this list is much more understanding of what Dumbo can do for us, and it still had all the new cards, right? Like we still had even the Lilo as well, the Dumbo, having 2 Yzmas, 2 Bells, kind of just like understanding like all of these evasive package. I think that this particular list, and Royce has been talking about this list for weeks over on X and things like that. I think Royce might also have his own Metafy. It's possible. So if you're looking for another like conversation, another information piece, maybe go check out Royce as well. Royce Townsend, like, I think just Google that and you'll probably get him on X. But yeah, so this is to me a better built version than the one we just saw. Like we don't have Timothy Mouse in this list, and maybe that's the argument, but we also we just have general better characters. I could argue that I maybe would not play Tink and just play Timothy Mouse instead of Tinkerbell, and then feel pretty comfortable about the rest of the list. Of course, I would have to go up to 4 Genies because we need to get evasive online, but having 3 Happy, 4 Genies with your Timothy Mouse should get that for you on turn 3, so on the play, you're going to be questing pretty well. Aside from that, I think that, this list is a pretty, just an upgraded version of the previous list. The one of Desperate Pran, also understanding that Smash, so this list has 4 Strength of Raging Fire, 2 Seven Dwarfs Mines, and 2 Smash, which is, already 8 right there, plus Bell is 10, plus Hypnotic Strength is kind of acting as a pseudo Fire the Cannons in a way, so that's almost 12. It's just a lot more to kind of understand what you're doing. Not to mention, Seven Dwarfs Mines is repeatable, right? Like, once it gets in play, you have Doc, you have Happy, you have like a bunch of different ways to interact. So I think that this list is probably the better list of the 2. It also finished in top 4 this past weekend, so it was able to melt Blurple and things like that. So if you're looking for a general list to start, I do think that this list, maybe with pushing some numbers around to try the Timothy Mouses, is probably the better list from the event. Now, Sean is the epitome of, hilariously, the non-budget version of this deck, but really what I look at when I see Sean's deck is it's no Dumbos. It's kind of funny to think why this deck is actually so expensive right now. I guess it's Yzma. So Yzma is now a $15 card, which before it was, a $5 card, so that really added to the cost of this. But, now you can get Bells for $1, which is great. This deck also has no Lilo, so there's no money there. It has no Dumbos, so there's no money there. So this is probably closer to a list that you might already have. And if you're just looking to be straightforward and say, okay, what do I do in a world where I can't get my Dumbos and things like that, you still have to respect Dumbo. That's the key factor here, is that everything that we're doing is understanding that Dumbo is just going to be in, honestly, maybe 50% of the meta. If Amethyst Steel is going to play Dumbo, if Sapphire Amethyst is going to play Dumbo, and it's going to be, 20%, 18%, that's 38% of decks right there. And then there's other cute decks that are Emerald Amethyst that might have to play it. There might be Amber Amethyst that might be playing it. Ruby Amethyst might be playing it. So you might very easily see 50% of your matchups that you play against in a tournament with Dumbo. And because of that, you have to respect the Dumbo. Now, there are decks that are, playing Smash, right? Like Smash is an 8-cent answer to a $75 card, in theory. But, playing Genie, I think right now, this is a card that in team meetings I said I'm just not excited to play, but I also just accept that I probably have to play it because I'd rather have a character in play that can just answer the Dumbo, and I feel a little bit better about it, and my opponent just can't draw infinite before I can respond and things like that. So that's kind of where I'm at, is that if you're not going to be the Dumbo deck, you have to have the correct amount of answers. This is, 4 Genie, 3 Bell, 2 Smash, 4 Strength of Raging Fire, right? So that's 6, that's 9. Technically, I'll take this for 11, and, that's where we're off to the races. We have 11 removals in here. So that's kind of where I want you to be. I think that if you're really building these decks, some of the core concepts over the successful ones this past weekend are decks that had, anywhere between 9 and 12 pieces of removal. So that's maybe where you want to land. If you're coming in lower than that, you probably need to figure out a way to get to that point, that hump, because sometimes, Smash is not a great card, but it's the best card when you need it and when it's there, and it answers the card that is most annoying to you. So while it's not super appealing, it does the job. And that's kind of where we are in this format right now. We're just looking for cards that do the job, and that's basically what we're getting away with here. So Sean kind of getting the job done in week 1, hitting a top 8 with 0 new cards in his deck. So if this is what you're looking for like a budget one, and maybe not even a budget because, again, so much things have gone up, but hey, like Strength of Raging Fire is cheap again. Bell is now cheap again, right? Like you can get these cards from Fabled because of the reprints, and you're just kind of all in on Yzma and Genie. Hopefully you got your Yzmas before the big spike, because I think that this deck kind of needs Yzma. But the other option for something like this that we haven't really seen will be the Illusion Treasure Guardian one, which we'll see in a second here. So now we're going to move on from that, and we're going to talk about SSG. So SSG had 126 players, and this is our winning deck from SSG. We just take a quick scroll down. Yeah, so this is our Treasure Guardian version. Treasure Guardian is the, if it'll load here for a second, 4 cost, inkable, 3 strength, 3 willpower, 2 lore with Untold Treasure. When you play this character, if you have an illusion character in play, you may draw a card. So we do get some stats, and we get a nice replacer. I have seen in this spot, like realistically, we have seen Yzma, we have seen Dolores, we have seen Dumbo. Obviously Genie, it was spoilers for anyone that did a full breakdown of this, but this week there was 8 decks, and only 2 cards in Amethyst Steel were in all 8 decks. Genie was one, and Strength of Raging Fire was the other. So those are the cards that are guaranteed lock. You're playing for those cards because, debatably, we just all agree that they're the best cards in the deck. So when you start looking at those replacements, obviously this list has 4 Dumbos and 3 Treasure Guardian. Again, we've seen Pain, we've seen Dolores, we've seen Madame Elephant, right? Like there's a lot of choices that you can kind of go with, but for strict draw, you're saying my 4 cost spot, it used to be just Rabbit, guys. There was versions of this deck that were just Rabbit. Now we're in a format where we have 4 Genie, 3 Treasure Guardian, and 4 Dumbo as our 4 cost characters. It's just funny to see how different the format is, because even being able to play this many 4 costs, just like Sapphire Amethyst is doing it well. It's just really nice to see that this is the concept that we're going for, and still understanding that, hey, this is how does this deck beat Sapphire Amethyst? Kind of the same way we did before. We get cards in play, we turn them sideways, we gain a bunch of lore, and we just kind of keep moving the game forward. And then we have the closing of Cobra and the White Roses. That's another big deal here. This one, only 1 Bell. Interesting. But 2 Jasmine. So this Jasmine is the 5 cost inkable, 3 strength, 7 willpower, 2 lore, with the ability take the leap. During your turn, this character gains evasive. Again, so it kind of adds to that Dumbo effect when you need it. And it's also, now's my chance. Choose to discard a card. Then this character gains Challenger +3 this turn. So you basically effectively have the ability to just machine gun down whatever you want. All in all, this was a great deck. This won a 126 player tournament at a format that looked just the same. Every event this weekend that these decks were successful in all had Sapphire Amethyst as number 1, Amethyst Steel is number 2, and Amber Steel is number 3. Obviously, if you got the pairing in Amber Steel, this deck just preys upon it. It's so difficult to lose that matchup, if I'm being honest, just because everything trades so well, and your opponent is just forced into really bad positions. Specifically, when we're playing Tiny Mim adversary, everything just gets scaled up. But yeah, all in all, it's nice. This deck was great. Thiago picked up a really, really nice victory, and it just, again, showcasing that the little things, these little subtle changes here, this 48 card deck that now we're saying okay, here's a Jasmine, here's a Treasure Guardian, here's Jafar instead of Lilo, but here's the Raja, and these are just the choices that we can make to be successful in different ways with this deck. And I'm just really important to me that you guys kind of see the different variations of this and understand why they're good, why they're bad, and why someone is doing something specific. Now we look at Mr. Bivens. Listen, Bivens is one of the best in the game. He is a top 4 worlds competitor. top 4 or top 8 Continentals competitor, multiple top 32s in Disney Lorcana challenges. This guy, he's just one of the best. So when you look at this list and you see kind of like how close and straightforward it is, we're just a Dumbo deck, right? Like, we're a Dumbo deck. We have 2 hidden hypnotic strands, 4 strength of Raging Fire. This deck, again, doesn't have mines, but we do have the ability to have mines. But what it does have is just like stats. We have the 11-1 cost characters, which is basically our way of, we've decided this is how we're going to get under Sapphire Amethyst in those matchups. But it also has the Mim Adversary for the mirror. I think that this card is definitely a consideration. If this week proved anything, Amethyst Steel is one of the best decks in the format. So therefore, you have to have interaction in the mirror to kind of like edge out little victories, because a lot of that matchup is just going to be about itty-bitty victories. So having a tiny adversary to really manage them, it's going to go a long way. This also had 4 Jafar Royal Vizier. With Mim, this card takes out genies. It just gets the job done. If I can trade my 2 for their 4, I'm going to kind of take that all day and like take it right to the bank. But this also, understands, has the Cobra still. Cobra was the other card that was, I think, 20 or 31 copies of Cobra. So basically everyone should have been playing 32, and this is like the 3rd card that's guaranteed that you should be playing. Dumbo did show up in most, but not all. But in this list again, Bivens was able to figure it out. He was able to get kind of what he needed out of this list and find himself in a top 8, 128 player tournament. And, this is not much different than what we're seeing, but it's kind of just repetitive, so you understand that success leaves clues, and there's things that are very specific that are definitely winning and doing well, and there's kind of those core pieces are the evasive pieces with Dumbo here. It's like one of those, and we'll come out real quick and we'll talk about this for a second. I think that on average, Sapphire Amethyst is the better, quote, Dumbo deck, because you have more ink, because you have characters that stay around a little bit longer, you have more removal that's character-based, so you can kind of get more out of the Dumbo. The problem is that with Steel, having cards like Happy, having cards, like this Jasmine, cards like Genie, you just have like these conditional evasive characters that are playing a role because your opponents are playing Dumbo and they're playing evasive characters like Genie and things like that. So it's nice to have natural answers. But what this also just means is that you're playing all these cards. So since you're playing all these cards, you may as also just play Dumbo, because you're like, if you can ever have the ability to gain the lore, draw the card, and just utilize your characters that way, if you can ever play a Dumbo on turn 6 and there's a Genie and a Happy in play, and like, you just say pay 2, exert both these characters, gain a lore, draw 2 cards, your opponent's not going to be happy about that. Like, they're just not, So when you talk about these standstill boards in mirror matches, Dumbo is a breaker. Like, he allows you to kind of like move the game forward, progress it, and force your opponent to now answer kind of multiple things. Because if they don't answer the Dumbo, you get to continuously draw cards with Dumbo. If they don't answer the evasives that are exerted, then like you just get to use them again. So it just puts people in really awkward positions. And I'm not like this, oh my god, Amethyst Steel Dumbo is the way. But if the metagame is so built around it, and you have to play all these cards to interact with it, all those cards also interact with your own Dumbos, it's kind of difficult to not play them. Do I think it's necessary? No. But it's just one of those where it feels like synergy is power here. And that's something we've always been looking for in Disney Lorcana, is that how often does all of our synergy match up to be better than power? And I think that this might be one of those situations where synergy just is better than power. But yeah, Bivens here again, kind of picking up a real nice top 8 finish. Kind of just straightforward again. Like, this is just the deck. Now, if we move into the final event from the weekend, we'll see some more repetitive action, but we'll also see something, a little bit different here. But here's our number 1 finish deck. Now, what's going on that's different? Fire the Cannons as a 2 of, and 4 Seven Dwarfs Mines. This is this second deck here that we're finding Seven Dwarfs Mines in, and there's also 0 Smash in this list. So this is like another interesting choice too as well. But you're talking about 4, 8, 10, 14 actions, no bell. But we also, we're kind of skipping a little bit here. But that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make here, is that this is 14 actions to interact with the board. 10 actions for locations as a way to interact with the board now, rather than relying on Bell and things like that, which isn't that hard to rely on her, but it's just kind of that choice that we're making. And it's just understanding again that removal is king, and if we can get it out of a location that also sits in play and gains you lore and kind of forces your opponent to interact with the board, otherwise you just get like free tick damage the whole game. That's great, honestly. That's very, very good. So that you kind of just take those. Hypnotic Strength is, to me, the most interesting card in this deck, because I have never found that we really truly needed that card. And I think with less Amber Steel in the format, you probably see this card go down a little bit. Maybe you don't abandon it completely because it still has niche like uses. Obviously, if I can buff my Happy with Hypnotic Strength and just take out a Genie, I'm going to take that 7 Ways to Sunday. But again, you're seeing 4 Dumbos. Like, that's just kind of the theory here, is that Dumbo was very successful this weekend. I think, I think it was 26 copies of Dumbo, if I remember correctly. So most of this Amethyst Steel decks that were successful this weekend lean towards Dumbo effects. So just kind of giving you the information of showing you what has been good and what has been useful and why it might have been useful. And again, I just talked about it, but it's basically all the synergy. Even in this one, we have 4 Happy, 3 Smee, 4 Genie, the 4 Dumbo itself, and of course Genie and Elsa again. So you just have 20 plus characters that have evasive, that all of a sudden when you just get to pay 1, exert them, draw a card, and gain a lore, it seems pretty good. It seems good enough. It really is showcasing that synergy is key, and this was a really big win. 180 player tournament, and this deck was able to pick up the win. It beat the Amber Emerald Dogs deck in the finals, which was the Under the Sea deck. Oh, and that's a big point here, guys. Peak Games Referee is basically nowhere to be found. This is a card that before, in the past, like, this deck was built on repeats, right? Like, pick up my character, play a Pete, pick up my character, play a Pete, make sure no one ever plays an action ever. It's just not the strategy we have anymore, because it's not really a thing right now. There's only like one niche deck that's kind of trying to play Under the Sea, or like one niche deck that's trying to play Circle of Life. On average, you can't just predict what your opponent's going to do on every given turn. So therefore, Pete seems like just the worst card ever. Like, even if you get lucky, like 1 out of 10 games, is that worth it? No. Like, the problem with Pete now, opposed to the beginning, was Pete always affected the game. Basically, anytime you played the card, you were affecting the game with Pete. It's just not true anymore, And because of that, that's why you didn't see any, like, Pete Games Referee basically anywhere in these decks. He just isn't necessary, if I'm being completely honest. Like, that's the core breakdown here. Aside from that, I think this might be the only list that played Octopus, and this is just a revolving choice here. You have Royal Guard, Captain Hook. I think Captain Hook is the guarantee. There was 31 copies of Captain Hook registers in deck, so like we agree that's the one. But then there's Royal Guard, there's Diablo, there's Palace Guard, there's Rafiki. There's just a bunch of different choices, so it's kind of just like where you want to be. I think Captain Hook is without a doubt the best one, so just play that card. And I think that Royal Guard, if you're looking for just the kind of like the ability to get stats moving forward, I think Royal Guard is also, on average, better than Rafiki because of the crackback. The 1 damage on the crackback is very relevant, and it comes up a ton. So therefore, I think rather than having the guaranteed, quote, 3 strength, having that 1 on the crackback when it happens, because it will happen, I think it's pretty relevant. So definitely another thing to take away, and just kind of look at this a little bit more. Like, this deck, in all honesty, with the 4 Hypnotic Strengths, I don't think you need that card at 4 anymore. Even if you just wanted to play like a Miser 1, I'm cool with that. But I might even just take these 3 and just make them Madam Mim Tiny Adversaries. And then again, this deck just looks fine. Like, you can just take this deck right up, sleeve it up, put some Tiny Adversaries in it for Hypnotic Strengths, and I would be completely on board. Fire the Cannons is not a card I love at all, but, if our uninkable count is okay, this is 14, I might even just get rid of this card too. I might just get rid of this card and just play Smash instead. So I think when we start talking about that, we get really close to the other list early on, the Royce list, and I think that that's the way I like it. I really like Mines right now. I'm a big, big fan of Mines, so that's kind of just where I'm at right now. Our last deck, of course, is Mr. Lee, and this was definitely the most interesting deck of all of them. A little bit harder to judge some of these things. I love Cogsworth. I'm a big fan, but it's also really difficult. But what I will say is that in certain tournaments, right now, we might have a little bit more of a, hey, this is definitely what your opponent is doing. So a card like Cogsworth allows you to offset the board, allows you to do some stuff that's different, and it'll absolutely catch opponents off guard, which is a big deal, which is kind of cool. But it's still tough to play. It's not easy. This deck only has one dock, which is crazy, but it also has this Dumbo. The 3-cost Inkable, 2 strength, 2 willpower, 1 lore, evasive. Then when you play this character, chosen character gains evasive until the start of your next turn. So this effectively makes a Calhoun evasive, which is kind of cool. Makes Captain Hook evasive. It could turn, a Cobra into an evasive, which is also very interesting. This is the only list that had Pete Gaines referee. I don't know what the particular reason for this. None of the other decks have it, and I don't think you need it. This is a card that you could instantly cut. This also is the only list that had an Arthur King. I mean, this card is so interesting because, like, oh man, I don't even know. I just don't even know why we want this card. Like, I understand it's big, it does a cool thing, and maybe that's relevant, but it is so difficult to put a 7-cost on Inkable in my Amethyst Steel deck that I think that I would cut this card instantly. Maybe it's just a card that he loves and he wants to play his one of Enchant. I'm not sure. But I'm not a big fan of this card at all. To me, it doesn't really fit the mold at all. Obviously, like, Tinkerbell into King Arthur is living the absolute dream, but I don't think, like, that's a Sapphire Steel thing. That's not an Amethyst Steel thing, so I wouldn't do it. Not for me. Everything else, pretty straightforward. This is what this is. I think this Dumbo is very interesting. This deck could probably use some Timothy Mouses. If we're going to play this Dumbo, like, we have 4, 8, 10. 10 3-cost evasive characters. And hilariously, this Dumbo can give Timothy Mouse the ability, which I think would enable you to actually, like, give yourself evasive in a weird way. Like, whatever it is. But Magic Feather is another card that would obviously work with Timothy Mouse. But all in all, you can see here, these decks are expensive. Like, we are not living in the world of budget anymore. $500, $500, $500, $500, $500, $400. Like, this Noah list here is the cheapest one, and it's because we don't have Dumbo. The same thing, like, for Noah and Sean, they didn't have Dumbos, and that's why they're the cheapest list. So if you can find a way, if Dumbo is just gonna pace you, it's just gonna, like, it's not part of your budget. I totally get that. I totally understand that, and I think it's, like, pretty fair. So hopefully when you look at these lists and you're kind of getting your concepts, you're understanding a couple things. Right now, the biggest questions that you should be asking yourself is, how do I draw cards when we're in top deck mode? Like, every game is going to come to that right now, and what is going to be your outlet for that? Like, in this, we saw Treasure Guardian, we saw Yzma, we saw Dumbo. Like, the common and most successful one, it seems to be Dumbo, because everything around your deck is evasive, and you're kind of just interacting with that way, so it kind of makes it a little bit interesting, a little bit fair. But, Yzma is a gamble. Treasure Guardian is only 1 card. Genie is only 1 card. Dolores is only 1 card. So it just, to me, that's where we're at. Like, that's step one, is like, how do we draw cards? Before, we had Diablo, we had Cusco, and a lot of our list that Nunez played this weekend, I think, was 4, I think if I have it here, we'll bring it up real quick, but I think it was, 4 Diablo, 4 Cusco, I think this is it. Yeah, right? Yeah, so this was the list that Nunez played 5-2 with, and it's pretty clean. It still has Pete, and we basically agreed that Pete was not good anymore. We probably wouldn't play it, and this is it. But, like, this is just the straightforward version of stats. And this also did not have a Dumbo, so this comes in at 235 because no Dumbos in the deck. This is where we were in week 1 because of Amber Steel specifically. We wanted to make sure we could win Amber Steel and then still have a way to kind of, like, beat Sapphire Amethyst and have a plan. But Nunez went 5-2, and he lost to Sapphire Amethyst twice. So, although you can have a plan, it doesn't mean that your plan's always going to work. And right now, I think that the biggest stress that I can put out there is, not only do you need a plan, you need to make sure the plan, like, executes. Like, if you show up this weekend playing Amethyst Steel and you do not think that going second you have at minimum a 50% chance to win against Sapphire Amethyst, I would not play this deck. That's me personally. If you can't figure that out, like, just don't do it. because you're just going to end up losing a lot of heartbreakers. The matchups are long, they're grindy, there's a lot going on. So I would definitely be considering, playing this more aggressive Timothy Mouse version, because I think that has a little bit more cleaner path to victory as opposed to the version that we played last week. We knew we could prey on Amber Steel, which we expected in week 1 to be the number 1 deck. We were just wrong. It was Sapphire Amethyst. So this week you have to have a good plan. You have to know that your plan is going to execute against that matchup, because you might end up playing it 4 or 5 times in a 8-round tournament. If you're at CCS, if you're at Ink this weekend, I would expect to play at minimum 3. Like if you're in the winners bracket and you're undefeated going in the run, you might play Sapphire Amethyst in rounds 4, 5, and 6. Like that's totally possible, and you might have played against one in round 1 also. So now you're talking about 4 rounds, half of your tournament against Sapphire Amethyst. So you need to have a good plan that's going to work. And that's really, to me, that's the fundamental point of this deck this weekend, is that while you can still prey on Amber Steel, I kind of expect it to go down in numbers because of how poor it was. So that's kind of where I'm looking at. Hopefully, breaking down these decks and kind of just going through these cards helps you understand the position of this deck this weekend. For me, again, key takeaways: how do I draw cards when I'm out of cards? Cusco, we talked about a little bit, but you had Cusco as well. So Cusco, Yzma, Treasure Guardian, is that good enough? Is Dolores good enough? Do I need Diablos and Cuscos? Do they fight the board well enough? Are they annoying enough? Is Library a potential card that we can play? I don't think so. I want to, but I don't think so. What other ways can we facilitate to kind of figure out how to draw cards? I think that's number 1 right now. Number 2 is how do you win that Sapphire Amethyst matchup? And then number 3 is very likely, how do you win the mirror? What are we doing in the mirror that's going to make a big difference? Because this deck won 2 tournaments last weekend. It won a 126-player tournament, it won a 180-player tournament, and it was the top 4 of a 73-player tournament. So this is, while Sapphire Amethyst was the most played, this was the most successful. So you got to really contend that as well. So all those 3 questions are what I would ask. How do I draw cards? How do I beat Sapphire Amethyst going second? And how do I win the mirror? That's the big takeaways this weekend. That's the things that you need to, you just got to get under. You got to figure those out. I think willpower is king. I think that card advantage does not always mean card draw. Having those lines of the willpower is a big deal. It makes it a lot more difficult for everyone to kind of interact with. Madam Mim, Tiny Adversary, breaks math. It breaks challenging. That's also a big deal. We saw lists with Ursula and things like that. So, that's another card. Can we play the 5-cost Ursula's Exert? Do we need more copies of Elsa? What other cards can kind of be a part of that concept? These are kind of where I am at the end of this weekend, going into inking, going into CCS, and then hopefully after this weekend we're going to have a full set of just understanding of okay, going into the CCQ at PPG, what can we do best to be successful in those? Thank you guys so much for watching this week. It's been great. I hope this guide has helped you a lot. Again, if you're watching this for the first time on YouTube and you're looking for more, guide is in the pinned comment below. Go check it out.